area.
Welcome to the Representing Rural podcast by Rural Community Alliance. And it's election season. So we have the pleasure today to hear from all of RCA staff. I think except for one staff member around pre-election information topics that and conversations that have been going on in their community. So I allow all the staff to introduce themselves. I'm Candace Williams.
I'm Tanya Broadnax, Southeast Arkansas.
Candy
I'm
Webb,
Matt
Central
Grandon.
Arkansas.
I'm Matt Grandon, North Central Arkansas.
All right. So we'll get right into it. What are the key issues your rural community faces going into the 2024 election?
I will say one of the issues that we see is lack of access to work and adequate housing in our area, which I know is statewide and a really big issue, but it is something that is always being talked about. How are we going to afford moving forward, and then not having the ability to work in our smaller isolated areas, and there's no real support system in place for those folks.
Okay, and then really one of the things is that we don't get any information about the upcoming election. Transportation to the polls is a problem also, in housing also. But we don't even get any information on candidates, bills, anything like that. And then, thank goodness RCA provides transportation to get people to the polls. Some organizations also do transportation, but I haven't seen any of this year.
I think one of the big issues in our area, other than housing, which is of course is a huge issue, is food cost and access. So a lot of our towns are very rural. They're so small they don't have a dollar store or a convenience store or any type of grocery store whatsoever. So that means they have to have a car or access to a car to drive 30 minutes to an hour into an area that has a grocery store if they're not growing it themselves. So I think that's another issue.
Okay. So I'll move into another category. How politically engaged are the people in your community, and what efforts have been made to increase voter turnout? We know Arkansas is, if not at the bottom, we're one of the states at the bottom for kind of voter turnout. So just want to hear from you all about how politically engaged are the people in your community, and if there have been any efforts there to increase voter turnout.
In our areas, if you're in a more rural, isolated community, it's a very red conversation. If you are more in town, it's a very blue conversation with the red conversation coming up the rear. So it's depending upon where you are, it's a very divided. But I will say in the more rural spaces, it's very, very red for us. And that really, those are the only candidates we see. Those are the only folks that come out. Those are the only folks that talk. Not that we see a lot from them after they're elected, but at least on the front end, they are present in our communities where the Democrats and independents are not so much.
Tanya or Matt?
Tanya, go ahead.
In my community, I feel like everybody would be very engaged in our community. But again, like what Candy is saying, they don't come to our community. We have not met anyone that was running for office. No one has been here to speak to anyone that was running. Well, not take that back. We had one gentleman that came to speak to our community, but that was it. What efforts, and I'm not going to keep saying rural community lines, but we do, voter registration, give them information on what's coming up, what to look for. But that was the only efforts that I saw this year, unfortunately.
In my area, most of the retired people are very engaged in the community and in voting. And the last couple of years, our area has seen a huge increase in voter participation across the board. I think that if you have some hot topic local issues, it really helps because people get burnt out with the national issues that just keep shoved in their face all the time. And when you're doing a voting, it's the local issues that you're going to have to live with daily. And it helps keep the community involved, even if it might be slightly divisive. So that's how it is up here anyway.
So what are the challenges, and you all kind of spoke of that, what are the challenges or barriers to voting in your rural communities? I think Tanya spoke about transportation, but what are there any other challenges or barriers?
I think in our area, in areas that have prison facilities, what we see oftentimes is folks that are able to vote if they would go through the process, felons who could have their voting rights back, but either have been made to think it's really difficult or are not even aware that they have options. So that's a barrier for us. And then also to make sure that our citizens understand why their vote is important, even if we don't see a direct result of that election. You know what I mean? Like Matt was saying, to really focus on more local issues for them so that they see the results. And if they don't see the results, make sure they know how to hold their representatives accountable. That's kind of because, we don't see a lot of the fruit that we get spoken to about when it's election season in rural spaces. We just don't see anything compared to what they say we're going to see.
So going around policy impact now, and Candy, you kind of led right into it. So what current or proposed policies do you think will have the greatest impact on rural communities?
Honestly, I don't think that there is a policy that's going to have a large impact on rural policies because we're not a priority for the people we vote for.
Right.
That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's what I want. Matt,
I agree.
Oh, you agree?
Yes.
So
I think
okay.
there is a policy that has a huge impact on rural communities, but it's usually to do with funding of public schools. So anytime they start messing with your public school funding, you got to watch out if you're in a rural community because it really affects the amount of money that comes into your small community because a lot of times your school's the largest employer. And I don't think they see that all the time down in Little Rock. They don't see the effect some of their ill-considered decisions have on rural communities and Arkansas as a whole because they're kind of insulated or isolated from the real issues.
I'm going to disagree. I am 100% sure they're perfectly aware of what those impacts are, and the money that they want to see isn't here, so it's not a priority for them.
Could be.
Again, my personal opinion.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so because a lot of the legislators come from more rural areas.
They
So-
know they live here.
Yeah.
And if they don't live here, their grandparents live here. They grew up in a community similar to the ones that their decisions impact, but we're not a priority.
So what
Well,
happens, Tanya and Candy, if we did have elected officials that we felt like prioritized us at the state level, at the countywide level, at the local level, which policies do you think would have the greatest impact? What policies do you feel like we need in rural spaces to have a great impact?
So you hear all the time about broadband and how many millions and millions of dollars is being put there, which is great. How big of a difference would it be if those same matching dollars went to a rural transportation system and people who needed to work could get to work?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems like we're so focused on digital, this, that, and the other, that we forget about the construction workers and the plumbers and the HVAC folks and all of those people that keep our world turning. And we have very talented, very capable rural citizens who want to do that work, but simply can't get there because they don't have access to credit. They don't have access to down payments. They don't have access to what they need to own their own vehicle. And there's no option in our rural spaces, even though we are touted as, you know, a rural state, natural state, tourism state, all the things that, you know, people, they go to our rural spaces for tourism purposes. And then we get the short end of the stick. So we're used as a draw to the state, but then we're forgotten when it comes to actual support.
I have a comment on that also. I think it's time to stop touting rural economic development in name only.
Mm.
There's all types of bills and grants that say
Oh my gosh,
rural
yes.
economic development, this or that. And 90% of it goes to a city like Clinton or Jonesboro, or, you know, and it completely bypasses even a county seat that's smaller that can't get these grants or funding. It's just this funnel directly to your larger communities, and they call it rural development, but it's not. It's
Is it 50,000 or less qualifies as rural for
that's the
most things?
federal definition of
That's
rural is
fair.
50,000 or less. And
And
you know, I think there's like 4 or 5 towns in the entire state of Arkansas that pass that are bigger than that, you know, or small, you know, that
Right.
would be disqualified from that type of funding. So it's ridiculous to call it rural economic development whenever every bit of that money goes into larger areas and larger suburbs, which already have the money for the most part.
in places
So
like Clinton, I would consider that a rural place. But the communities that we
or
work with,
Conway. I'm sorry, I didn't say Conway instead of Clinton. Like
okay,
that last
I was
grant
about
that
to
we
say,
read, I think there were 10 grant, and there were a couple $1 million a piece, and 6 of the 10 went into places like Conway, and the others went into similar size areas. It's not needed as much there as it is, you know, where else in the state. So it's very irritating that every time I see one of these rural economic development grants or proposals or bills or whatever, you just look at it and you're like, yeah, right, because it's never for rural Arkansas.
yeah, and it's no knock to these places that may fall under that federal definition of rural, but our point is it's just not getting to the more rural places that really, really, really need that extra assistance, really needing a hand up, you know. Talk about bootstraps a lot, and some of these communities bootstraps are broken, the tongue is hanging out and everything else. The shoes are gone. So they
sure.
really need more intense support.
I would say in many of our schools, their ability to thrive was lost when they lost their school. My community is a great example of that, as is Candace's, and I'm sure Matt could attest to that. We were left with community centers that have zero public funding, zero. Our tax dollars don't benefit anything to do with our community, even though we pay those tax dollars. They go to places what we would call in town. They go to town, and then we're unincorporated where we are, and we have zero county support for our community center. We have an empty school building that was left behind, donated to us, which we're grateful for, mind you. But because we don't have the access to the support, it sits empty most of the time. And it's a constant challenge for upkeep and management.
It is. From personal experience,
But then, you know, when they have their campaign speeches, they always refer back to when they were in the rural community, when they grew up, how to look out for the rural communities, and they share their stories. But then, you know, it's just like, I feel like that would be a question to actually representatives, because I'm saying, I'm just going to be, you know, be fair. maybe they have reached out, and some of our rural communities, we don't keep up with our emails. We don't check our emails, or some of our mayors are not computer literate. So they may have asked, they may have reached out, or they may have funneled the information downwards, and we just never received it or never acted upon it. So
I would say that's true for some places. I have not had that experience myself, but
I mean, Candace asked
it's
the question earlier. What would happen if, I think she asked this question, if your local elected officials started actually doing stuff that benefited local where they lived and where they represented. And I think my answer to that is a lot of the parties would lose a lot of the power that they have. Because the way politics are working now, no matter how it affects your community, you're expected to vote with the party you represent. And even if it's detrimental to your the people you're supposed to be representing, you end up representing the party instead of the voters in your district. And I think that's a huge injustice. And if you're just going to do that, why did you even get into politics? If you're
they do
taking
take
an
care of
oath
that.
to represent the people who elected you, if a policy's coming down that's going to be bad for them, you should vote against the party if it's not going to represent the people in your district. That's just the way it's supposed to work, instead of the way it's
Right.
working now, which is very, it's very, I want to say it's very
political.
harmful to the whole system that we've set up.
That's correct.
So how does access to healthcare, education, and technology factor into the political decisions of rural residents in your region, in your community?
How does it factor in? I would say it doesn't have an impact on decisions in my area because we don't have access to that stuff unless we drive 45 minutes. So
Yes.
Not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's true.
I mean, we have evidence that the lack of access to all of those things is evidence that my vote is not gonna impact, my representative is not gonna impact that in my area. So take it off my plate. We don't need to talk about it because it's not gonna be here.
Isn't that something? And I know
Weird.
everybody has something to do. It's not like the end all or the total reason why, but the low voter turnout. When you look at rural places that you've taken their public schools, their local public schools from, they're technically sending their millage, to another community. I mean, there is nothing there for them to see that's being locally invested into.
Right.
So,
Well, and we have these, we have trees everywhere, timber taxes and lots of communities, and those timber taxes go to the school district and not the community. So when you have a community who's absorbed into a huge school district and you have a timber tax that's $150,000 a year, that is huge for a small community. But we don't get that. The school district gets it.
it's a drop in the bucket for their
And
school
it's a drop in the bucket for that school district. But for us, it would be a game changer all the way about. So our money is taken from us, given to a space that doesn't need it, and then we see no return, except for our kids are in a great school. And what is our literacy rate in this state overall? So, you don't even have a valid argument there.
I would say the ability for a lot of your local reps or elected officials to affect anything in the healthcare, transportation, or housing, they're impotent when it comes to that kind of stuff. I was talking to a leader in the area, and they've managed to fund some needed infrastructure, but they had to do it through community work. This is something the government should be doing, but the communities are having to set up a funding structure and do it themselves because they can't get any local or any official to get enough force behind it to set it up. When your senior centers are going bankrupt and all the funding is not going where it's supposed to go, it turns to your local community to actually have to pick up the slack. And unfortunately, a lot of communities can't pick up that slack, so
At
it's just the way it is right now.
the
If you want
conference
change, you have
that I
to do
was,
it at the local level.
oh, for sure. For sure. And the conference that I was at this week was there was a lot of talk about obviously healthcare in the northwest corner of the state, because that's where they're planted, but then to branch out into the rural areas. And there's a lot of options. All of them are private venture capital options. None of that, there was little to zero discussion about any support coming the way of our government for those things. It would be a very privatized situation, which I'm not opposed to. Whatever works at this point is what the priority is going to be, and we obviously are seeing that the government's not it. So hopefully we'll get to see and engage in some of those new, those innovative. I mean, they really are some cool ideas that are coming down the pike. I'm excited. I was excited to hear all of that.
Hopefully they come all the way down the pipe.
I hope so.
all
I
the
hope
way
so. One of the groups that is heavily invested in that field is heavily invested in rural Arkansas already, and the Delta already. So hopefully we'll get to see some of the implementation happen there.
Okay.
We shall see. So
I hope so.
I hope so. What improvements or changes would you like to see? We have a session coming up upon us in 2025. So I don't know if I'm just so discouraged in a way, but hopeful also that, the only way we can go is up. So what improvements or changes would you like to see from policymakers to address some of these service gaps that we have in rural areas?
Actual roundtable discussions with citizens from the communities they represent.
To hear from them directly. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Sit down at a table in a room and just talk through the crap.
come visit those communities also.
It'd be nice for them to show up, not in a suit, not in their Sunday best. So just sit down and have a conversation with people about what's going on and what are your ideas. Not what you're going to do, but what do you need? And then figure out how to hold them accountable.
But even not of that, if it's like to even let us represent our counties and our communities also too, just to have a space available for us to let them know what is going on. Because when we reach out to them or email them, it's a really quick response, can't make it, can't be on the call, let me know. And, you understand that they're busy. And then some of those people are really too old to go to all these communities,
If they're too old to go to the people they represent, they need to get their butt out of the chair so somebody else can sit there.
Right. Because they cannot go there just by
That's true. Hey, it may be time for them to set it out.
There are two things I'd like to see changed. I would like to see the abuse of the emergency, what do they call it whenever they pass a bill under emergency?
Geez, I know what you're talking about.
Well, they've abused that over the last few years, when they know that if the populace finds out about these bills and these changes, they're going to have a hard time passing it. And the other one is I would like to see them stop attacking the FOIA bill. Because the FOIA is there for a reason. Anytime your public official has to be less transparent is bad. I don't care how much, they complain how much extra work it is, this and that. Well, nothing's perfect, but if you're just going to give them a blank check and not check up on them, there's all kinds of abuses to power that the FOIA bill has protected people from or shined the light on that we would have never known about. And I need them to stop going after the FOIA bill because it's inconvenient to them. That's fine. It's supposed to be inconvenient to them. It's supposed to be to help people know what their elected representatives are doing and to hold them accountable. That's all I got to say about it.
Thank you. I want to get to some of our questions around youth engagement. So How engaged are young people in your rural communities in the political process, and what issues do you feel resonate with them the most?
It's hard to engage young people because I feel like they see the lack of investment in their own spaces. And so what's the point?
Mm.
I don't know if that's it. Ever since COVID, your schools have been a lot harder to get into, hold events at, to actually engage with young people to do stuff, because that was always the venue you could go to before to have access to a lot of them for them to host events at the school, or but young people now, they're hard to engage with because a lot of it is they're not community minded in a lot of ways. And I think in order for that to change, they have to be kind of taught it younger. So I don't know how to change that. It's gonna have to be something. Somebody smarter than me's gonna have to come up with something.
I think that they are engaged, and I think they would be very engaged if we were consistent in our engagement with them. Children need, things to be consistent, and they are concerned about their community, especially when they're in high school, because, most of the time it's competitive. I'm from this town, you're from that town, my town has this, my town has that. And we asked our youth a question, when we walk through these rural communities on the way to school and you see these houses and the condition of the travel to school, that's already a downer before you even get there. It's not a morale booster. So I feel like if the adults should be consistent engagement with the youth and follow through and engage them and inform them. And I think that they would do really well.
Thank you. So around that participation, what do you feel like what could be done to encourage them? You mentioned consistency, but the three of you what do you feel could be done to encourage them to become more active in elections and voting and things like that?
Well, getting their opinion, meeting with them, and information, because they don't know, they don't know who's really running unless they're watching television a lot. They don't really know who's running for office or what their values. It's just considering them, and considering their opinion and bringing them together. And they're very, very instrumental in anything that's positive. And once you, get to that point.
I would say following through once you know what their opinion is, to make sure that you're not just setting it in front of them that day, but that you make sure if they have something to say that you can accomplish, that you accomplish that together. And also to get them to the Capitol. The kids that go to the Capitol with us that have the opportunity to sit down with the representatives, even if they're not their own, they have that in their brain. They see that in the Delta, we have kids that see their representative, positive or negative work that he's doing. They see him, they recognize him, and now they're excited to know him, which opens the door for you to have an honest conversation about whether or not his work is beneficial and what they can do about that. Because they have a tangible connection now to the person who represents their area.
Yeah, I think Candy's right. It becomes, if you can get them down to the Capitol and take a tour of the Capitol building, talk to their own representatives in their area, it actually becomes real to them. Whereas before it didn't feel real to them, or at least it wasn't important because it wasn't something that they had cemented in their head as a real thing. But you take them down there where the Capitol is, and they can walk the building and see tangible things where these policies are made, and I think it becomes more important to them immediately.
So, what do you feel, one word, what do you feel resonates with them the most right now? What issues resonate with them the most? One word from each person.
Censorship.
Censorship. Okay. What'd you say, Tanya?
I don't think,
Or just one thing, it may not be one word, but like, what's one thing you feel like resonates with them the most right now?
Safety.
Okay. Matt.
I think I agree with Candy. It's probably censorship, good or bad.
Okay.
What
Real
about
quick.
you? What's your one thing?
Ooh, what is my one thing? Stability, financial stability. Yeah, I think that's on a lot of their minds. Like, they don't know what they're gonna do after graduate from high school. And that worries me so much because I'm like, okay, what's my place in this? What can I do? So I wanted to get to a few more questions before we leave because I know some of us have to go. So what do you hope to see? Oh Lord, what do you hope to see in the aftermath of the 2024 election, regardless of the outcome? And how can organizations like RCA prepare for potential shifts in policy or leadership?
I would like to see a shakeup of after this of who we get to vote for. Unfortunately, I think in a lot of ways at the national level, it's almost turning into an oligarchy. And I would like to see competent people that we could vote for in elections, and some people might not think this, but not the best of two bad choices. I'm sick of it. I want to see someone fairly young, fairly fit, and fairly competent with all their mental capacities running for both parties. And the way it's been going the last 3 elections, it's been awful. And it's a trend that's unfortunately supported by the parties because, when you got people dying in office, something's wrong.
Something's wrong when you're in office. It's time for you to go.
Right. If you're going to pass away in office, were you really that effective the last 2 or 3 years you were in office?
No.
So there was no one, you brought no one up behind you that could. It's okay. Candy and Tanya.
I think they should remember their campaign speeches. With the campaign speech, what they ran, what they said they were going to do, implement it. I've been saying that lately to different people. That's not what you said when you were running for office. That's not what you said when you were running for office, because you remember the campaign speech, and you can't, it's impossible to do all of it, but at least you can say you did 3 things out of that campaign speech or 4 things. So, and accountability, like let the oath mean something to you. Let the people mean something to you, because that's why you ran for office, not because some people encouraged you to, or you thought it'd be a good thing to. Is because, and then you actually said words that what you were going to do, so what needs to be changed and what needs to happen. So just, if you're not going to honor all of it, do at least, implement half of it at least.
I agree with both of them, but I would also like to see less focus at the national and state level and really dig in at the local level, so that we are better prepared to hold feet to the fire in the next round. Because I think we just get so caught up in the drama at the national level that we take our eyes off the ball at the local level, and that's where we miss out. We miss an opportunity to make sure people are doing what they say they're going to do at the local level. And I think that's been a trend for lots of years.
I want to see some young, ambitious people run for office. I mean, they might lose, but they need to shake it up. I'm tired of for your reps and mayors being 78 years old.
Agreed. Yeah, I think we need to, when we get started at the first of the year and everything, the dust is settled, that needs to be when we start preparing our voters for the next election, and not waiting until the last minute to make sure they know and understand this is what they said they were going to do. Let's make sure they're doing that.
Right. I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you all for listening to us and giving us your time today. We will come back post-election, to have another conversation, but this is just the tip of the iceberg of some things that we wanted to, discuss before. We have 6 days now 6 days.
Mhm.
All right, y'all go out there and vote. If you can, take people to vote, help somebody vote. Just do your part in making sure our voices are heard. Until next time, y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.